Yeah, so I'm Andy Bagworth, the branch secretary, and have lots of pleasure in extending a warm welcome to everybody, whether you're local in the UK or indeed from somewhere across the world. Also, a special welcome if we've got any non-members on the meeting today. We welcome you as well. And we do appreciate you taking time out of your busy schedules to be with us, and hope you will find the presentations today interesting, informative and useful. Now, I've been a member of the branch for many years, and I've had the pleasure, I think it is most of the time, of doing most of the different committee roles, including chair. However, hosting a meeting in front of my PC screen is a first for me, and it's quite a strange experience, and I'm sure a lot of people experience this. So if I could just ask you to bear with me, so if the screen goes blank or suddenly you can't see me, just bear with me, but hopefully that won't happen. So at this point, I'm absolutely delighted to introduce our first speaker today, which is our very own IOSH East Anglia Branch Chair, Angela Abbs. Now, Angela is also a member of the IOSH Construction Group Committee. She is a competent health and safety consultant and trainer, and has been running her own business, AMA training, health and safety, since 2013. Angela specialises in not only providing health and safety training to business and charities, but also soft skills training, which is quite important in many of our roles. On the consultancy side, her work includes supporting various industries, including local authorities, housing associations, mental health services, the motor industry, hotel and catering, solicitors, private offices, theatres, and even a nightclub. And I think it's Angela's excuse, I believe, to go boogieing at the weekend so she can see what's happening at these nightclubs. But I'm sure she'll refute that. Now, Angela lives with her partner, Chris, in West Norfolk, and I'm sure she won't mind me calling her an outdoor girl. She's a very keen clay pigeon shooter and enjoys working and training with her young black Labrador called Raven. Now, the title of Angela's presentation today is, Are You Really Looking After Your Best Assets, Your Lone Workers? So without further ado, over to you, Angela.
Thank you very much, Andy. I'm not sure about the nightclubs. We're not allowed to do much of that at the moment, are we? Let me just share my screen, if I may. I think that's the one, isn't it? Yep, we're there, I think. Hopefully you'll be able to see that okay. Does that look all right to you, Andy?
Yeah, that's perfect. Yep.
Okay. So, yeah, are you really looking after your most precious assets? You know, your workers are the most precious things. Without your workers, you haven't got your business. So we need to look after them. So the lone working stuff is what we're going to look at today. As Andy kindly said a little while ago, outdoor girl, yes, as you can see. So just so you know who you're dealing with, really, this is me, farmer's daughter. I was quite pleased actually when I put this up that some of the pictures, actually the one there of me with my dad's pigs many years ago, which is probably 40 years ago. I think I've got the same hairstyle, so whether that says anything about me or not, I don't know. Yeah, I love to work and train my gun dogs as well. And then obviously I go to the professional side of health and safety. So I started off civil engineers receptionist when I was about 17 or 18, I think. Then I became an estate agent, and that's quite something because I'll talk about Suzy Lamplugh in a little while. An estate agency is something that then lone working wasn't really even thought of when I was in the business as such. And we'll look at Suzy Lamplugh and why that's different now. Then I went through maintenance surveying and managing for local authorities and housing associations, where my interest became into health and safety after going through surveying training, I went on to the building side and then health and safety, and off I went. So then consultant and trainer in different industries, as Andy said. Health and safety and soft skills. IOSH are very keen on their soft skills stuff just at the moment for the competency framework. So I'm quite interested in doing that. I put 25 plus years experience. I think it's probably nearer 30, which is a bit of a worry. IOSH has been a really strong thread throughout my career now for 15, 20 years, I suppose. And I'm really chair now, having been secretary and on the committee for a while. So what we're going to cover then today, we'll have a look at a definition of lone working. I'm not afraid to say I'm going back to basics here, because what we're trying to do at the moment with IOSH is we're looking at people of all different levels of their OSH career. So we're looking at associates and technical people joining us, as well as the more experienced chartered members and chartered fellows. So it's a back to basics one to a certain extent, and that's what we'll do. So we'll look at Suzy Lamplugh. I've already alluded to Suzy Lamplugh. Employers' responsibilities, employees' responsibilities. I'm not going to go into employees too much because that's where Vince is going to come in later. I'm going to have a look at some lone working case studies, and then I'm going to set you some challenges at the end so you can actually put your hand on your heart and say, yep, I'm actually doing the right thing for my lone workers. So Vince is going to follow when I've finished, and they are very much interlinked. You know, I will say some things that Vince will say, but I think he's going to do more in terms of the lone worker experience themselves, where I'm going to do the employees' responsibilities or the employer's responsibilities a bit more. So definitions then, a big problem really. Those who work by themselves without close or direct supervision. Simple as that. Doesn't mean to say they're physically alone. I've been working with some social workers who they take the young people they're looking after out into a shopping centre, but they're working alone with that person. And as I was walking the dog earlier on, there's a guy out in the middle of a field on a JCB, and he's got lots of people in another field beside him, but I'm not sure that they were keeping an eye on him. So you don't have to be physically alone as such, but certainly working alone. 6 to 8 million people in the UK working alone. 46% of them consider themselves as lone workers. But actually, I think most of them don't realise they're lone workers. You know, there's people sitting at home working, they're lone workers. So it's likely to rise with the change in working habits now. And with COVID, we've all been encouraged to work at home. And when people are out there now doing deliveries, you know, you get deliveries now at home all the time. There are more of those now than there ever used to be. So more lone workers again. 150 lone workers are attacked every day. That's a recent British crime survey. And then Inside Housing magazine, I was looking at that the other day, and they did a reader survey fairly recently. And 69% of those people who are readers of Inside Housing, a social housing magazine, have reported being assaulted during their work. I wonder how many of those actually reported it properly, or whether they just responded to the survey. Physical and verbal abuse. We're not just talking fisticuffs, we're talking verbal abuse as well. So it's a huge problem. And to be honest, it's often not recognised by the employer. So let's have a look at these. All these lone workers, all these people. Housing, estate agents, people working in show homes on their own, people going visiting with housing associations and local authorities. Then you've got your social and health workers, your community nurses, social workers, probation officers, people doing home visits all the time. Home workers, we've said. Transport, I mean, how many lorry drivers have we got? How many van drivers have we got? And then with those, we've got warehouse staff, and they're loading and they're unloading often on their own. Construction, yeah, we've got site workers. Again, yes, we've got a lot of people on a construction site, but maybe there's the guy in a building they're working on his own. He could be overcome by some fume or another. He could fall off a step ladder. He's in effect lone working, so they have to think about that. So out of hours working, security people, people cleaning after hours, locking up offices, people in shops. And when we look at some case studies later on, I'll sample some of these. People in takeaways, you know, the little lady in the Chinese restaurant down the road, in the takeaway, she's on her own. She's facing people out front, they're on her own. Utility people, water, gas, electrics, meter readers, and then something close to my heart, because my other half is a mussel fisherman. The fishermen out there, they're in a boat on their own very often, forestry rangers, and then the emergency services, police, paramedics, first responders, all sorts of people. So really, if you look out of your window or you get on your computer or you drive along the road, somebody somewhere that you'll be seeing will be lone working. It's a massive, massive thing. What I'd like you to do, thinking about those definitions, if you could, is just answer these. Perhaps if we can just put the poll on screen, please. I'm an employed lone worker. I'm a self-employed lone worker. I'm a manager or a supervisor, so responsible for somebody who's a lone worker. I'm employed and content with my company's lone working arrangements. And I'm self-employed lone worker and happy with the arrangements for my own safety. So I think, Brenton, if you can just put the poll on the screen, that would be great, please. She says with her fingers crossed. There we go. Perhaps you could do that for me and then just hit submit, and then we'll have a look and see what we've got and what we've got in our audience and what they consider themselves in terms of lone working. So we'll just give that a minute or two. Somebody can just give me an indication as to when that's complete. All done. It's all gone a little bit quiet.
50, yeah. It's in progress. About a minute left, Angela.
Lovely, thank you.
Results have come through.
That's great, thank you. What are they?
Share the results.
Yeah, that'd be lovely. So 46% of you say you think you're a lone worker. Hello, where have the results gone? Can we have them back? Thank you. 7% self-employed lone workers. 61% say they are managing lone workers. 46% say you're content with your company's lone working arrangements. And 11% self-employed and happy with your own. Okay. What we're going to do later on, I'm just writing those down for my own reference as well. What we're going to do later on is have a look at that again, because when I set you a couple of challenges, I want to see if you changed your opinion a little bit. Okay, thank you. Right, so the Suzy Lamplugh Trust then. I've been quite privileged to be involved with the Suzy Lamplugh Trust and have done the train the trainer with them and worked with them for quite a while. For those of you who are old enough to remember what happened in 1986, which I'm afraid is me and a few others, I'm sure, around me, Suzy went alone to show her client around a house working as an estate agent. And to this day, nobody knows what happened to her. We've seen various things on the news, haven't we, with somebody digging up a garden somewhere because they might have found a clue to where she might have gone. But actually, nobody still knows. So Diana, Suzy's mum, set up the Suzy Lamplugh Trust virtually that same year, actually, after she'd been sort of missing for some time and there was no news. And it's a great source of training for skills and strategies for keeping lone workers safe. And if you'd like to, I'd have a look at that if you're interested in looking after your lone workers in a good way. And they do some great training courses too. And Suzy's mum as well campaigned against stalking and harassment and got some of those laws through. So her disappearance, if we look at that and think in terms of what we're doing today, I think isn't working for some reason. Why is that? Oh, there we go. what we do today, this virtually is an uncontrolled lone working event. So think in terms of what we do today and what happened then. So 1986, Suzy is 25 years old. She goes out of her office to show someone around a house. Diana, her mum, was called by her manager in the late afternoon and basically said, "Where's your daughter?" So late afternoon, she disappeared from the office at 12:40. She only took with her a handbag. Sorry, she only took her house keys and person left her handbag, which did sort of indicate that she was going to come back to the office. She was seen waiting outside the house in Fulham, and then she was joined at 1 p.m. by a man and witnessed walking away from that house. 18:45, that's 6:45 in the evening, her manager reported her missing. Her office diary only said the address and Mr. Kipper. If you had somebody who phoned up Mr. Kipper, you'd go out, wouldn't you? Yeah, of course you would. But 6:45 in the evening, it was before she was reported. And then she was seen arguing with somebody outside that house. So could it have been prevented? As I said, that's an uncontrolled lone working tragedy, really. I'm not sure that my things are working. That's better. So we think in terms of being allowed to be alone with the client. I mean, in those days, and probably in these days, actually, estate agency, you'd go out there and you'd be alone with a client. But in other threads of work, you wouldn't let anybody be alone with a client unless you knew something about them. And she probably didn't know too much about them. Now, when I was in estate agency, which probably was about 3 years different to when Suzy was there, I think it was 1988, 89, I was in estate agency. Do you know, if that phone rang and somebody said, "I'm standing outside a house, I can see a for sale board," we'd go out. We'd just drop everything we were doing because we were so keen on being told to sell property. You didn't give a thought for your own safety, to be honest. You'd get in the car and you'd go. You probably wouldn't tell anybody where you were going. And, you know, I came back, but obviously Suzy didn't. So the manager's responsibility, he didn't phone until 6:45 that evening. He didn't phone till later in the afternoon to speak to her mum. So does the manager actually know? What's the manager's responsibility? Was she trained? Was she new to the job? No, I don't think she was, because she was a fairly experienced estate agent by then. Keeping in touch, well, in those days we had mobile phones that looked like bricks, or we were going to the phone box down the corner, weren't we? But keeping in touch now is so much easier. Enough diary details? No, we didn't have enough there. What we did start to do after Suzy went missing was to ask people to come into the office to meet us first, then take their details, and then we would go out. But at that stage, we didn't know. We just, you know, we didn't do too much really. And I don't think she did, by the sound of things. So risk assessment, 86, people weren't doing really risk assessments then, were they? And following lone working procedures, well, Suzy's mum really got the lone working thing underway. So she probably wasn't following procedures, was she? So what we need to look at then is employer's responsibility. Now, our responsibility as an employer, I'm having a problem with my thing here, there we go. Our employer's responsibility is to risk assess. So we have to prevent those accidents and incidents that would happen in normal work. So slips, trips and falls, road accidents. And then we need to look at attack, violence, verbal and non-verbal. So that's the general risk assessment for a role, let alone lone working. That's what we've got to do to protect people when they're working. Then we've got to consider illness. So when we're lone working now, becoming ill and other medical incidents. So we've got to look at that person. Are they fit for the job? Do we know if they're fit for the job? Then consider the remoteness of the workplace itself and where that workplace is. Then working from home, just the same responsibilities. And when it comes to communication, you've got to be able to keep in touch and respond. And the health and safety executive do give us some guidance on high risk roles, where confined spaces, diving, electric and that sort of thing, where you're not supposed to be working on your own anyway. Then we need to look at, I'm sorry, my mouse is misbehaving, so I'll carry on and do what I can. So then we need to look at stress and well-being. Now, being alone all day, working out there remotely, can put a lot of stress on you. You can feel isolated, your mental health can really be affected, and you can feel quite disconnected from the group of people that you would normally be working with. If you think of the van drivers, they're out there all day and they're on a schedule. They've got to get one delivery, then another delivery, then another delivery, and they're pushing it all day and they're on their own. So the employer has a responsibility there to keep in touch with those people and not actually push them too hard, to keep it reasonable. The health and safety executive management standards, for those who you are aware of them, they include, there's the 6 management standards, and include the importance and the importance of support from other workers and from the employer as well. So that's something to bear in mind. If you keep in touch with these people, you can detect the signs of stress and mental health early, and you need to keep a conversation with them. You can't just say, right, off you go, let us know when you're finished, and that's it. You need to keep in touch with them. And if any of you read the IOSH magazine just recently, for those people who are working at home, talking about well-being, there's a higher incidence now of domestic violence, because literally people are shut in with each other during lockdowns at the moment. So again, the employer has got just as much responsibility as if they were in an office as for them being at home, to check in with them, make sure they're okay. Then there's first aid in emergencies. So making sure emergency procedures are in place, providing first aid equipment, and making sure that those people who are out there on their own at least have the basic knowledge to be able to treat themselves if something goes wrong. I mean, yes, if they're knocked out, obviously they can't. But, you know, for the initial small emergency stuff, then they need to be able to treat themselves. The contact numbers have to be in place and they need to be tested too. So if anything goes amiss, people need to be able to get in touch with their bosses. If you can hear little moaning noises in the back, I've got a little dog on the floor. I saw somebody's got a dog over their shoulder in one of the pictures as well. COVID-19, that's now giving us an additional risk for health and safety and for lone working. And I've borrowed this, and Ian, who's doing the Q's and A's, he'll recognise this jigsaw, but it is just the basics of basic infection control. So when your lone workers are out there, you need to be able to allow them to get these 4 elements right, and you need to help them to do that. So the personal hygiene, the ability to wash their hands. So if you've got people out there in a van and they're doing deliveries, or they're away from a base and they're visiting people's houses, you need to make sure that they can hand sanitize and wash their hands somehow. Make sure that environmental cleaning is done. So the touch points, you know, the car door handles, the house door handles, any other things that they touch that might carry that virus. Limiting the contact, the social distancing and the spacing that we're all getting used to needing to be doing now. And PPE, it's no good just saying, right, here's a mask, off you go. It needs to be suitable and sufficient for the task that they're doing. Then you need to have a COVID-19 policy and a COVID-19 risk assessment that links in and updates with your lone working policy and your lone working risk assessment. The two don't work in isolation anymore. So we need to make sure that that is now how it should be. When you're writing your policy, you need to include the risks by the job role itself, not a generic one. I mean, I've been working with housing associations, and very often they've got a lovely lone working policy, but it's not identified by the individual risks. So you might have somebody who's an office worker, you might be a housing visitor, you might be having somebody who's doing repairs. All of those have got different risks by the different role. So you can't just have one generic one size fits all. You can have your overarching one, but you need to specify those job roles with some key definitions in there. So you need your background, the purpose of a statement like you would normally have in any policy, the organisational commitment, but the clearly defined responsibilities. So who looks after that person, who gets in touch with them, who reports them missing at what different time, who supervises them, that needs to be recorded and clearly defined in that lone working policy. How to report incidents. So those people who need to report incidents, near misses too, know how to do it and the simple way of doing it, how to get emergency help, how to get support, and it has to be unique to your organisation. Don't do a copy and paste thing. And of course, as with all things, it needs to be communicated and reviewed regularly. Told you this is back to basics, didn't I? So employers' responsibility then to train, supervise and monitor. How many times have we heard train, supervise and monitor? Workers should be competent, and I put in brackets capable there because IOSH are now talking about capabilities, not only competencies, and I'll just have a little slide on that in a minute. But to deal with the requirements of their job, the basic job that it is without the lone working, let alone the basic job with the lone working. They need to be trained in any technical stuff that you've given them to keep them safe, and we'll have a brief look at those in a little while. Able to recognise when they should get advice. Now, I've been working with a lot of social workers, and do you know what? They are so keen on getting the job done in helping those people that they don't stop when they should. If they get the gut feeling that there's something wrong, really they need to be backing out at that stage. But they want to help these people, they want to get the job done, and they get themselves further and further and further into these situations. So they need to be able to recognise, actually, now I feel unsafe, now I need to back off, now I need to get help. And that links into understanding the risks that their work involves and how to control those risks. And how to cope with unexpected situations. And I think Vince is going to talk to us about that a little bit later. So, you know, you've got to have your sixth sense, your radar going when you're working on your own. And as a manager, you've got to know these people's jobs inside out. If not, you can't supervise them. So you need to be setting limits on what can be done when they're working alone. As I say, don't overstep that safety mark. And people need to have the confidence and know that they've got management support, that if they do want to pull back, that the manager will say, yeah, absolutely, that's fine. You did the right thing there, not to push them and push them for results. So the higher the risk, the more supervision that's required. If you've got a chap who's on the top of a crane in the middle of a construction site, he's up there on his own all day most of the time. So he needs to be supervised. So you need to be talking to him. You can't just leave him up there. So the higher the risk, the more supervision. And obviously as well, new workers, junior staff, people who are apprentices, higher level of contact. I mean, hopefully you won't have an apprentice out there doing lone working, but you might have apprentices on their own at some stages, or younger people on their own at some stages, hopefully for not too long, but in office situations or lower risk work. So monitoring and keeping in touch, making sure that they understand any system that you've got in place, making sure that the supervisors know as well. It's a two-way thing. So when the supervisors should visit and when the workers are expected to see these supervisors, they mustn't think, Big Brother's watching me. Big Brother is actually looking after you. Big Brother's not trying to find out whether you're doing your job or not. They're just trying to make sure you're safe. So any devices for raising alarms, knowing where your lone workers are and keeping that regular contact if you're a supervisor. You need a reliable system for the end of the day and during the day as well. So we need to check in, we need to check in, we need to check in. And at the end of the day, somebody somewhere should know that that person is safe and well and finished work. And these systems have to be tested. We used to do send someone and make them go missing and make them not reporting at the end of the day. And I tell you, sometimes it was quite frightening, but actually if that particular supervisor had been off, it might not have been that they'd been noticed for 24 hours or more. And it's quite worrying really when you do a lot of lone working training and you get the feedback from different people. They often say, do you know what, I wish my manager was on this course, because if I went missing at 5 o'clock, nobody would know. So just test yourself on that. The other thing we have to think about as well is English is not as a first language. We've got more and more workers now that are not British, that are not speaking English as their first language. And we need to make sure that they understand and they can communicate, and the communication we give them is in a form that they understand. So you need to perhaps just search yourselves on that one. I did just talk about the difference between capability and competency. This is something that we're looking at in the competency framework for IOSH at the moment. Is my mouse going again? So we always say that competency is having that combination of skills, knowledge, ability, experience, all those things that you bring to the job. But what we're saying now about capability is more in the now, that to be able and efficient, having that ability for a specific task and having that real good disposition to be able to carry out that task properly. So competency in a way is brought from the past to fulfill the needs now, or what you can bring to the job. But being capable is in the now and developing and adapting for the future. So it's a combination to be able to react and be proactive about the job you're doing. And that means ongoing training. And that doesn't mean only ongoing training for the people doing the remote working. It means training the supervisors as well and the people who are looking after them. So have a think about that if you're managing lone workers and systems. Just a bit about tracing systems. I'm not going to go into this in great detail because I think Vince will be doing some of it as well. She says, trying to get her mouse to work again. Buddy systems, do you know what the best systems I think we've got are those where somebody is personally involved in keeping somebody else safe. And if you've got a team working together, if you buddy up two people together, they really do get to know and take responsibility for each other. Now, if you're running a great fleet of vehicles, that doesn't work quite as well. But if you've got a fairly small team, that can work very, very well. Your lone worker devices, sometimes by external contractors, sometimes they're hidden in the name badges. There's all sorts of things out there that can be used. What I would say is, though, that whatever you're using, it's got to be working, it's got to be tested, and you've got to know that it's suitable for that type of work and for that team that's actually being, using those systems. And compliance as well. If you want to have a look at BS 8484, that's the suitability for purpose for these provision of lone worker safety systems. That's the British standard. So I'd have a look at that if you're considering buying or you're checking your own systems to make sure that they're actually suitable for purpose. There's a real great description in there on what suitable for purpose actually is. I'll quickly talk about employees' responsibilities, because in any health and safety world, all these apply. The reasonable care to look after yourself and others, safeguard other people affected by your work, cooperate, using the tools properly, not to misuse anything, and to report all accidents and injuries. But having said that, if you read through those and go back to basics again on employees' responsibilities, then the reporting back system for the employee taking responsibility for themselves is just as important as the employer's responsibilities. So let's just have a look at some case studies here. And if you think back to the Suzy Lamplugh of could it have been prevented? So a subway worker here trapped in a freezer overnight. So she's a female, 4 degrees of temperature. At 11:15 at night, she's putting the milk away, so she's tidying up at the end of the day. Door release handle on this chiller unit, the fridge unit, wasn't working. It had been reported, but nobody had done anything about it. The clothes weren't great. She was wearing sort of the thin t-shirty type things that they wear in the hot kitchen side. So she was found at 7:30. The prosecution was saying physical and mental damage, close to catching hypothermia. She said she was so cold that she didn't have the energy to bang on the door, and she got muscle fatigue through being cold. So Subway were fined, quite justifiably so. But the repair was reported, nothing had been done about it, and the risk assessments had been inadequate. So could it have been prevented? Absolutely. Somebody keeping in touch with her, a good risk assessment, and actually doing the repair that was needed, and she'd have been fine. So that was 2015. Another 2013 one, and this is NHS Lothian, and this is one that, but for the grace of God, I think a lot of social workers and visiting health professionals actually kind of get away with it. It sounds awful. So a community psychiatric nurse, she's 55, visiting the patient who's age 58. The patient is schizophrenic and has been known to be schizophrenic for 30 years, known for attacking with blades and known as a risk. The actual visitor, she's an experienced nurse and she's used to mental health patients, but nonetheless, something went wrong there, attacked from behind, forced to the floor, threatened, shaken, her hair pulled out, and she's left with flashbacks and really quite scared of doing further visits. So Lothian are fined 32,000, quite rightly again. Failure to report under Riddle, they didn't report that for 8 months, which didn't go very well when the actual the fines were put in, or the prosecution was put in. They didn't update the records, the training wasn't good, lack of a specific risk assessment, lack of audit. Now, you'd think, wouldn't you, in something the size of NHS Lothian, that there would be all these systems in place, they'd be well rehearsed and they'd be stuck to. But that one just goes to prove that they're not always. So the big company doesn't necessarily mean that you've got good systems or that they're tested systems. This is another one, 2015. Working alone, 48-year-old chap, moving a large milling machine when it overturned and crushed him, and it was fatal. The machine had been lifted, so they jacked it up to enable him to work under it, and he's working on his own, and the worst happened. So they didn't ensure that he was sufficiently trained or experienced for such a potentially dangerous thing, not properly planned, no safe systems of work. Fined £1 million and a victim surcharge. Was it preventable? Absolutely, they're all preventable, aren't they? And this one, because I do my outdoor pursuits, I find this one quite disturbing actually. A gamekeeper, 52 hours after he went missing, this guy was found. He'd overturned a quad bike. He was a temporary stand-in gamekeeper. His body was found about 200 yards from the quad bike because he'd crawled, poor guy, to try and get help. He'd had some really severe pelvic injuries. No means of raising alarm, although there was a mobile phone signal, and the normal gamekeeper who'd been off sick had been issued with a phone, but this guy hadn't. Prosecution noted that the injured gamekeeper didn't die immediately, and if he'd had means of communication, then he would have an opportunity to summon help. So yeah, the Borders trustees of this big estate got fined for failure to provide means to make sure that he could report in at the end of the day and during that shift, and not having a proper risk assessment in for the lone worker. And it was the first lone working prosecution in agriculture. And this is a very current one. This happened really not far away from, just villages away, only on the 24th of October 2020, so this year. Again, he's working on his own. Crush injury to the chest, asphyxiation. He's 18, he's left to tidy up a yard of wooden pallets on his own using a forklift truck on a Saturday afternoon. The manager returned to find him pinned against the wall by the forklift, which was still running. Magpas turned up. That's the Mid Anglia General Practitioner Air Service. That's a fantastic, fantastic charity. They were called, tried CPR and declared him dead at 5:56. This is still in being, and we can only assume what might have gone on there, but obviously he was left on his own. At 18, we question, was he trained? He probably may have left him on his own. We just don't know, do we? But another very, very sad lone working incident there. So complacency then, your worst enemy. I'm just mindful of time here. I think I've got about 5 minutes left. Complacency, okay. So that's smug look. So definition then, a feeling of smug or uncritical satisfaction with one or one's own achievements. Been there, done that, think we got away with it, you know. All those things that say, yeah, we're near enough, we've got systems in place, we're fine, nothing's happened so far. But then you don't want to get into that was close, or the worst thing, like that lad pinned by the forklift truck. You just don't want it to get that far. So don't be complacent in what you're doing. You know, you think you've got some good systems in place, but check them, test them, make sure they're actually suitable for the purpose that they're meant to be. So this is your complacency check. So as an employer, are you complacent? So there's a few questions here. And I want you to put your hand on your heart and say, yes, Ange, this is actually the case for me. With adequate risk assessments in place for the tasks that our staff carry out. So have you got those risk assessments in place? Are they reviewed? Are they suitable for purpose? I would be able to list the 3 main risks to the personal safety of our staff. Do you actually know what your staff do on a daily basis? And do you know the 3 main risks to them? We have proactive, not reactive, proactive and best practice control measures in place to control the personal safety of our staff. Our senior management team takes seriously their responsibility for the personal safety of our staff. Very often, senior management say our managers to do that, but actually they need to be right in it, don't they? They need to be responsible as anybody else is. If questioned, our staff will know our own working policies and procedures. Would they? If you asked one of your staff if they knew exactly what the loan working policies and procedures were or where to find them, would they be able to? I feel confident that our staff report accidents and incidents of violence and aggression, including near misses. I'll guarantee you that not all the near misses are even thought about. People come back to the office and think, yeah, that was a close one, but they probably won't even discuss it. They might even be embarrassed by it, but they do need to report those. Once you talk about a near miss, you stop it happening again. We have robust and tested loan working procedures. Try doing a man down incident. Don't tell anybody, but just let somebody go missing and then see who picks it up and where they pick it up and how it's escalated. Our staff receive regular and appropriate training around being safe in the course of their work. Do they? And there's one for you if you're a manager. I have all the knowledge and support I need to help my organisation to manage the personal safety of our staff. So do you as a manager of loan workers get the support and the resources that you need? And then there's the employee challenge. I think Vin's is going to get a little bit more involved with this, but I'll quickly read through them because if you are a loan worker, you might want to put your hand on your heart and actually say, yes, I do all these. I always do my research on the client, place or premises before I leave. Or do you just grab your stuff and leave and off you go? I leave my contact details and update my calendar diary before I go out. Or if you're a lone worker like me, do you put where you're going on the kitchen pin board like my other half insists I do now? After I started lecturing him about something, he said, well, what do you do? That's how I know to do it. My colleagues will know where to start looking should I not return on time. Think back to Suzy Lamplugh there. I always make someone in the office aware of my change of plans. So you might have all your office Outlook calendar updated, but if those plans change, do you let anybody know? There's a clear missing person procedure with appropriate escalation. The number of times I've dealt with questions when I've been training and I said to them, you know, all right, you go missing, who does what? And they actually don't know. And sometimes the supervisors don't actually know. So that's quite a worry. And it's not an unusual circumstance. And I'm sure Vince will say that later on as well. There's a system to raise the alarm covertly in an emergency while I'm working alone. So can you press a button somewhere or have you got your phone all keyed up ready to go if something goes wrong? And then if you do that, I'm confident that an appropriate person in the office will pick up the phone if there is an emergency, or will it go to voicemail, or is that person on holiday? When I'm working alone out of the office, there's a system to monitor my safety in at the end of the day. So do you know there's somebody watching out for you? Is there a check-in at the end of the day? Is there a check-in during the day? There's information available for my line manager to contact my partner or family to ensure my safety should I fail to return. So have you given your employer your latest contact details? Have you told them you've changed your car? Have you told them that you've moved house? Have you changed your mobile phone number? And then this is one that catches people out as well. My partner or my family have got contact details of a colleague or someone at work should I fail to return. Now, how many people have told their partners exactly who to contact if you go missing? So just have a think on that one. So the hazards in your daily operation. What hazards could your loan workers face? What can you do about them? What are your procedures? Are you complacent? Are your loan workers complacent? You need to update your risk assessment and your policy. Make sure it's not generic. Make sure it's specific to those roles and make some changes. And what I'd like to do now is just run the second poll. This is the last thing we're going to do. So after everything I've just said, I'm wondering if you're going to make any changes. So if you can run the poll, please, that would be lovely, whoever's in the background, I think Brenton probably. So I'm employed and I'm still content with my organisation's loan working arrangements as they are. I'm self-employed and still content with my arrangements for my own safety as they are. And then this is a bit of a hand on the heart, be honest one. The day job, you know, the work, getting the job done has probably taken more priority than loan workers. That's a bit of a sad one, but if it's true, you need to be doing something about it. And then hopefully I'll have noticed something amiss and I'm going to change something. So if you'd like to just complete those polls, those questions, and submit your answer, and then we'll see how we've done. You able to run that, Brenton? And give me some answers, that'd be lovely. Everything's gone quiet again from my backup team. There we go. So, okay. So I'm employed and still content with my organisation loan working arrangements. Now, 63% of you say you're not. I'm self-employed and still content. Now, 90% of people say they're not. That's interesting. Only a third, actually, but it's good that it's only a third, say that the day job's taken more priority than loan workers. And the good news for me, which means I've got my message over, is that 87% of you are saying you're going to change something. Maybe it's only a little tweak. Maybe it's testing a device. Maybe it's having a practice. Maybe it's rewriting a policy. I don't really care what it is, as long as you're doing something. And 87% of you have made that commitment. So I'm really pleased. Okay. So thank you very much. Ian, I don't know how you're doing with questions, whether you want to come in with some questions there.
Hi, Angela. Thanks for that. The only question really was more of an admin related question, which was about the slides. Will they be available after the event, which I'm sure they will be?
Yeah, we will do that. Andy now puts the session together and edit it all, and then we'll publish it through our own channels. Andy, do you want to just come in there and say what would happen?
Yes, Angela. Yeah, what we do with all of our sort of Zoom meetings stroke webinars is we take them away, and then for some reason I've put my hand up and said I would have a go at editing the videos, so I tend to do it for our branch, and we put them in a form whereby they can be used on the web, so they then get published on I believe it's a YouTube channel, and there's links to that from the various places on the IOSH website, including our own website, and we'll always also put a link on places like LinkedIn and Twitter. Is that okay, Angela?
Yeah, that's lovely. Ian, have you got any more?
No, I was just going to see if anyone did have a question, if they just wanted to type a Q into the box now, and we could invite you into the conversation, maybe.
That's lovely. I'm really pleased that 87% of you say you're going to make some change, because that's important to me. So thank you for that. And hopefully something good will come of it. Okay.
Well, if there's no more questions, should we call it a day there for the first presentation? On behalf of all of us, Angela, thank you very much indeed for that. Most informative and interesting from my point of view, and certainly thinking about this risk-based approach to loan working, I think is the right way forward. So appropriate controls to the risks that you're going to be encountering as part of lone working. But of course, you raise quite rightly that that's not enough. We need to have competent and capable people as well. So there's lots involved, but and obviously you've raised a few thoughts in all of our minds about what we are doing about lone working, for ourselves, perhaps lone working for the teams and the businesses we support. So hopefully we'll all take something away from this presentation. Saying thanks, Angela.
You're welcome. Thank you.
All your work into this. It is appreciated. Well, welcome back, everybody. Our second speaker this afternoon is Vince Donovan of Safety Solutions Training Limited. Now, Vince has served 30 years as a police officer with the South Wales Police. During his police career, he acquired a wide range of practical skills and experiences in criminal investigations, community safety, crime prevention, emergency planning, and hate crime, spending the last 6 years of his police career working in the specialist field of counter-terrorism. As a director of Safety Solutions Training, Vince has specialised in the delivery of conflict management and lone worker personal safety for the past 20 years. Clients include many of the local authorities, housing associations, and supported living providers across England and Wales, in addition to national charitable organisations such as Crisis and The Big Issue, who obviously support many of our vulnerable individuals within our communities. As a result of the current health crisis, and we all know what that is, Safety Solutions have adapted many of their specialist training sessions, enabling them now to be delivered virtually online via Zoom, Teams, and no doubt other platforms. Vince is a keynote speaker on the subject of violence in the workplace and lone working safety, and regularly provides presentations at national health and safety forums. Before I hand over to Vince, a quick reminder about posting any questions you have in the chat room, please. If you could proceed your question with a queue, that would be useful so we can filter them out. So without further ado, over to you, Vince. And I guess you're going to tell us your story, which is a bad day in the life of a lone worker. Thank you.
Yes, indeed. Thank you. And thank you for allowing me and giving me the opportunity to speak for the IOSH group this afternoon. So thank you very much for that. Yeah, so I'm going to build on that introduction. Certainly, as a serving officer, dealt with many violent incidents, whether that be domestic violence situations, or at different times I went to various hostels or projects where fights had broken out, self-harm issues, suicide-related issues. So it'd be fair to say I certainly saw my fair share of challenging, difficult situations. And the presentation I've put together for you this afternoon is all about a bad day, a tough day in the life of a lone worker. And I'm not sure if you're able to see my slide. Have you spotlighted my slide so that that looks clear for everybody else? Just checking on that before I go into it. Does that look okay? I hope so anyway. So
yeah, it's good. It's good, Vince.
That's great. That's good. Okay. So yeah, as was mentioned, I work with lots of different organizations. I work with about 16 housing associations, local authorities, lots of national charitable organisations across the UK, homeless charities, women's aid groups, substance misuse charities, and certainly those charities who support young people with challenging situations, prison leavers, generally speaking, where people have had suffered real difficulties sort of integrating with communities or had problems in their personal lives. And invariably, it's a case of lone worker staff trying to support these individuals. And they've been my focus in going forward. So when I said about the going through the key elements of perhaps a bad day, I wanted to cover the role possibly of a health or care worker, of the social worker and housing officers, and even that can extend then to trade staff and utility workers. But I'm just picking up on what Angela said earlier in terms of estate agents too. All this presentation applies to the staff themselves, employees going about their work, and the types of things that they should be aware of in terms of fulfilling their obligations as employees in meeting the arrangements within their organisation to try and maintain their safety. I'm also going to touch on, in addition to those members of staff who go out and visit people in a home-based environment, I also work with a number of staff who work actually in the projects environments, whether that be in the daytime or covering the night shift, the sleepover shift. And again, in their incidences or situations, they could then find themselves dealing with quite challenging or difficult situations. So this is the icing I'd like to sort of present to you. I'm also going to hint on some great tips, things that you can use your mobile phone for. You can activate yourself. So please grab your mobile phones, have them to hand. I'm going to show you things such as how you register your mobile phone to if in an emergency situation, you would be able to text the police. I'll talk about ICE in case of emergency, and some other interesting, useful apps, which I think are really, really good. And there's certainly things I commend within the training course itself. I'll just mention very briefly towards the end of the session on the requirement of staff then to report these incidents when they've had this particularly tough, bad day. Okay. So as Angela mentioned, a lot of Angela's presentation was on the requirements for the organization, the employer. But my aim here is to look at the employee and what are the role of the employee. And really, as the employee, they should be familiar with the policies and procedures with regard to training and instruction and supervision. So all those, so whether it might be on initial induction, so shadowing another member of staff, being then supervised, how many of our organizations are in a situation where a senior manager actually accompanies a lone worker to make sure that when they are going about their work, that they're doing so correctly, they're following the procedures and safely, because that actually is a requirement for organizations in compliance of that legislation. So staff should be familiar with the policy that they're adhering to when performing that role. In addition to that, they should identify and be aware of all the risk assessments and follow them accordingly. And organizations are responsible then, guided by staff, for identifying certain risks or hazards. And this is certainly, I feel, is one of the best examples I've seen of an information flagging system where an organization has used the traffic light system to raise issues or warnings to staff to, for example, make sure they attend as a joint visit. There's an issue regarding dogs or weapons or information that needs to be found or established prior to the visit. The red one there, no staff visits. Potentially violent persons at the property, and sometimes no male or no female home working. So staff being vigilant, making sure they're carrying out their information checks, asking those questions prior to leaving and making their way. And again, linking on to what Angela said earlier, where is it they're actually going? And as I was sort of sat back listening and then checking in the attendees on this particular presentation, I realized very quickly we're not just from the East Anglian region, but I guess throughout the entirety of the UK, and it may sometimes even be further afield. But the point I'm going towards is where staff then are going to a new location, perhaps they're not familiar with, how they then use the likes of Google Street View and take it right down onto the street level to see, for example, the property they're going to visit, where they can park outside, and to get a little feel for that location that they'll be visiting as a lone worker. And just a little tip on this, right, once you use Google Images, if you go right to the bottom right-hand frame of the image itself, it'll actually provide the date of when that photograph was taken to give you some context of how up to date that actual image is. So all we're doing from the safety of the office is getting a feel for the location we're going to, if that is the case that we've never been there before. The requirement for staff then to following procedures to update the diary accordingly with regard to their various visits. And if those change, if a certain visit is cancelled and one is brought forward, that then through phone calls, then that's updated then. So at least people know within the organisation where their colleague is. And as Angela also said about the reliability then of a buddying system. In my personal experience with regard to buddying systems, I tend to find feedback from staff where they said, look, I tell you what, I was so busy, I forgot to ring the buddy. I forgot to text them. And sometimes with human issues, the nature of human factors as such, sometimes that may not be that reliable. It's a case of, oh, damn, I must give them a ring, I'll let them know. So sometimes we forget, and an element of complacency kicks in with that form of communication system. It's also important for organizations to identify emergency procedures. So what do we do in the event of a concern? And we're not just looking at violence and aggression, but we're looking at medical issues, trips, slips and falls, and some of the other examples that was described in the earlier presentation. So what does our organization have in place? What does your policy say with regard to being unable to contact a lone worker? Well, firstly, do we have their details? Do we have not only their works phone, but their personal mobile details, their home telephone number, their next of kin? Do we know what car they're driving? Because if there was a concern and you were asked and you made that phone call to the police and the police said, what car were they driving? So do we have details of the up-to-date vehicle and registration number of the vehicle that the member of staff was like to be using? Do we have any medical conditions held on file as well? So these are type of things that the organization should be responsible for managing, whether inside normal working hours and even outside normal working hours. So we have that ability then to pass on that information to the authorities when asked. So, okay, so most lone workers or lone workers should then be provided with a mobile phone. And there's an example then of not only being able to make contact, but in some cases, mobile phones being available then to use apps for monitored external devices, different companies and different organizations. These can be incorporated into name badges where the device, it can listen in, it can be activated on with regard to the SOS systems. They can also operate off a fob nowadays, linked to the mobile phone. And these are getting more sophisticated and better and improving all along. So this, at least in this situation, an external organization is managing that risk, responsible for that particular risk. And I always say in the event of a situation escalating, there's an opportunity for the member of staff to activate that device. It means that people then within that centre are listening in, recording, and where necessary, escalating it to either a line manager in accordance with the policy or the agreement, or directly to the police. So that's how we can meet our emergency arrangements by in essence, subcontracting that out to an external organisation. Now, time and time again, I always, whenever preparing a presentation for a certain organisation, I always ask them for their emergency procedures with regard to code words. And I kid you not, I think 95% of all organisations say the red folder. You've got, if you're a member of staff and there's a problem, just ring us and say, yes, I'm with Mr. Jones, and yeah, can you have a look in his red folder, please? So I'm just telling you that, I'm putting that out there, that if you're using the red folder, 95% of other companies are using it. And if Mr. Jones happens to have a bit of a temper on him, he would have probably heard that code word before. So forget that and change it and pick up another one. A recent one I heard, which was really, really good, it was phone Stan. Stan, S-T-A-N, staff threatened, assistance necessary. Okay, so be a little bit more creative, or contact the senior director or the chief executive of the organization. Something specific or particular to you, but please forget the red folder. It's dust that one off. No, it's been used far too often. Okay, so phones ready. How many of you have set ICE in case of emergency on your phone? I think it's really good, and it's something you should encourage your lone worker staff then to consider. particularly staff who are involved in agriculture, those members of staff who are working remotely where there are perhaps risks regarding sort of medical related situations. Certainly the ambulance staff, when you do a first aid course nowadays, ambulance staff are trained. If they're dealing with an unconscious casualty and there's no reason to suggest why they're unconscious, that they will check the individual's phone. And if ICE is then activated, that will give them the opportunity to see if there's any medical conditions noted or recorded on the phone, which is accessible to them. Alternatively, if there's nothing listed there, it will give them the opportunity then to ring an ICE, and in case of emergency contact, to establish further information with regard to the welfare and the condition of our individual. So I always encourage staff to activate, choose and select that accordingly and program your phone accordingly on that. Certainly on your iPhones, Androids, you can do that. Some of the older phones perhaps not, but certainly those smartphones, you'll find that functionality on there. Okay, phones are ready. There's something else I want to mention. Are we aware of the silent solutions, excuse me, facility? 999 and then ring in 55. Now, this is a facility that we could all use. If, for example, a lone worker was felt in danger, I'm so sorry, excuse me. And wasn't able possibly to ring the police and say exactly where they were. If they then rang 99 and coughed or made a little sound, a bit like I'm doing now, then all they then do, the operator will then say press 5, or you just press 55. That means rather than going through the BT switchboard, police, fire and ambulance, what service you require, the call then is immediately transferred as a result of pressing 55 direct to the police, who will then assess it, listening to exactly what may be going on in the background. Ideally, I always say that it would be really, really useful if we did have, and we were able to give our location, would be great, but then the police will act accordingly on that. So that's the Silent Solutions 99955 facility. I'm afraid not much is actually known about that. But equally, another one is how we discreetly contact the police in emergency. And again, this is something I share on training. So I always encourage those staff who have an iPhone to consider this. There is a little bit of a caveat. If they've got young children, sometimes children might grab that phone and it can ring the police. But let me explain the nature of it and what it actually means. So if you go in on the slide there, you'll see, if you go into the settings app on an iPhone and scroll down to the emergency SOS feature, that then opens up the image then on the third slide there of auto call and countdown sound. Now, to operate that or activate that, you activate auto call. But I always encourage lone workers then to deactivate the countdown sound. You want it to be discreet. But what it means is, in a difficult situation, an escalating situation, just by pressing their phone 3 times, 1, 2, 3, the on-off button, that will actually ring the police. And sadly, I've only just recently changed my phone over to the Android network. But I normally, when speaking at presentations, I'll hold the microphone against it, I'll press it 3 times, and then the police actually, well, the switchboard actually take that call. So it does work. I've tested it many, many times. Please be aware of it. Something for you to consider and pass on to your lone workers. So what if you haven't got an iPhone? Android, Samsung phones, some of the more modern, more up-to-date phones provide additional features and functionality. Again, linking into the ICE in case of emergency contact, you can actually set a various degree of instructions. You can ask that when you contact your ICE by pressing 3 or 5 times the on-off button again, that you could send your ICE contact a GPRS location, a little map of exactly where you were when you've activated that device. Not only that, if you look closely, you can also see that you can attach photographs, the front and rear facing photograph on that phone when you've had cause to activate that device. In addition, you can choose to send a 5 or 10 second recording, I believe, 5 second, I think, to your in case of emergency contact. So these are things that I encourage staff to consider over and above their existing policies and procedures or devices and anybody can do this. You can use this and just being aware of that type of functionality. And this is something that, again, sadly, very little is known about it, and how you can very, very easily activate your phone or register your phone to be in a position then to send a text message in an emergency situation. So how many of us have actually done that? How many of us have actually heard of that? Because I'll tell you now, if you were to try and text the police or text for the ambulance service, if you try to text them, you get a text message back saying, this phone is not registered to send text. Right, so how do you do it? And what's the purpose? Sometimes, particularly in the East Anglia region there, very, very remote, very rural areas, you might find that you don't have a very good signal at all. Sometimes it'll say no service. Sometimes it'll say emergency calls only. And what that means is that your network isn't available, but because of the agreement then with the other mobile providers, that you're actually borrowing the satellite of another provider in order to ring the police. However, to send a text, you have to authorize your phone and your network to borrow or tandem onto another network to be able to send a text message to the police. And it's quite easy to do that. And all you have to do is go into your normal text app, as if you're going to send a new text. You type 999 into the telephone area at the top, and in the comments area where you would normally type your message, type the word register. So it's 999 at the top, register in the content area. You press send, and then within 3 or 4 or 5 seconds or so, you'll have a text message back saying, do you wish to register this phone to send text message in an emergency, yes or no? You then type the word yes and send it, and you get another text message back saying, we now confirm that this phone is registered to send text message in an emergency. It's as simple as that. I think it's a really good idea. And I'll give you an example. On a recent course I delivered pre-COVID, a member of staff said that she was serving an eviction order on quite a difficult or challenging tenant within his property. The tenant got particularly angry and quite irate with her and demanded to speak to the manager because he wasn't having it at all. And insisted. And he told the member of staff, you're not going until your manager comes here. The member of staff felt very, very threatened, very scared in that situation. The member of staff, having registered her phone, said that she would comply. She would text the manager. Instead of texting the manager, however, she did 999. She then typed the exact location where she was, said that she was in danger. She was being held against her will by the named tenant, and she texted the police. The police responded to that message and very, very quickly responded to that location. Subtle, discreet, the ability to use a text message to contact the police in an emergency situation, and that's how you do it, as simple as that. Please pass on that little tip to your staff, put it on your intranets. I've got details on my Facebook pages and things like that with regard to that information. I'll move on. A great app, particularly those people who work in isolated locations as lone workers, is the What 3 Words app. It's an incredible app. It's free. It doesn't use 3G, 4G. It just works off the GPRS system, and it will pinpoint exactly where you are outdoors and place you in a 3-meter square. The organization concerned have laid a mesh, an algorithm mesh across the entire world made up of 3-meter squares. And each 3-meter square, and is here one there in this one, Loud Fame Sport, each 3-meter square has got its own unique code, its own unique name. And a situation was shared on a course recently, even a virtual course. A lady said that her boyfriend went out running. He had quite a nasty fall. He broke his leg in extreme pain. He had his phone with him. He rang the emergency service. He rang the ambulance. They asked him where he was. He said, I'm not really sure. I'm on a country path. I can't really describe it. The emergency service asked him if he had the What 3 Word app. He didn't. He very quickly downloaded it. Once he downloaded that app, he was able then to activate it. It pinpointed where he was. He said the name of the square he was in, table, cup, light. They looked on their computer and were able then to send the ambulance service directly to where he was on a country track. They were able to locate him. So it was a really good system. So for lone workers working remotely, a great app for you to consider downloading. It's free and it works off the GPRS system. So I would certainly recommend that and do so during training. Another requirement for our lone workers, this course I delivered yesterday, they're lone workers, because not many actually get this. I was really surprised. It was in their policy, all lone workers to receive a first aid pack. And it's their right to, as indeed any other member of staff. Because if a member of staff in an office environment suddenly has a medical incident and there's a first aid member of staff then available to support them and use a first aid provision, well, in exactly the same way for our lone workers, they should be afforded the same health and safety and welfare as any other employee. It's a requirement that lone workers are provided or have access to some form of first aid provision. How many of us actually cater for that for our lone workers? Because I don't see an awful lot of that. And so let's rephrase and let's pick up where we were. As a lone worker, I identified a real variety, and in many cases, the member of staff knows where they're going. They've met the service user before, the tenant, and so forth, but sometimes not. And sometimes they're traveling to different areas that may be unfamiliar with them. And I'm very conscious that some staff are using public transport, and some staff, for example, may well be using the underground. And if I can, I'm just sorry, let me, oh, not that one. Let me just see if I can do something for you a sec. I don't want to share that. Let me just share this for you a sec. 2 seconds, I've got it. There we go. So, underground situations. Hang on, that's all looking good. Let me just come back out of this slide and I'll give you that effect. It all looks quite a bit weird. Let me get into the right one first. Hang on. Perfect this a bit later on. So what I found using Zoom, I'm able to actually put myself in environments where staff might feel a bit uncomfortable. So using public transport. This happens with the underground. I trained some barristers on Tuesday. Unfortunately, there was a terrorism incident 3 or 4 weeks ago in London where a far-right extremist had gone into one of the legal practices with a machete, and their staff wanted more personal safety training. Training with regard to being isolated alone in different situations, using public transport, not perhaps as busy as that currently because of the current situation. But great to have these visuals that link in terms of context with regard to their working environments. I'm just going to go back into this slide. Let me just get this right, and I'll work through those a couple of times. So back in slide. Okay. So looking at whether that be the underground systems or sometimes staff traveling or driving in their cars. Just checking I've got the right image. I have indeed. Yeah, good. So traveling in inclement weather. Again, the need then to be in contact and know where our staff are. What if a member of staff breaks down on a motorway? What do they do? It sounds common sense, but how many of you know, for example, that yes, you've got to get out of the vehicle, every other vehicle, hazard warning lights on, turn the steering wheel into the barrierway, and when you actually get over the other side of the barrier, before doing so, where do we actually stand in the other side of the barrier? Do we stand at point 1? Behind the vehicle, the other side of the barrier, 2 alongside, or 3 up in front. Now, my advice always is to make sure you stand behind the vehicle, this side of the vehicle, this side that you might see where the cursor is. Because sadly, there have been incidents where people have been at point 2 or point 3 here, and another vehicle has collided with this vehicle, careering this vehicle into this hazard area. That always the safest place is to be behind the vehicle in this instance here. And when I talk about staff who may be working in more rural areas and traveling on A or B roads, I always suggest that if they do break down, that whilst they're waiting, that rather than waiting in the driver's seat, which is perhaps comes very quickly to mind, that they sit in the passenger seat instead. And when I ask why that might be, and straight away, well, people say, well, if another car was to go alongside it, I'd feel a bit safer then. So if there was an element of damage, I'm furthest from it. But for me, the psychological element, I'm waiting of sitting in the passenger seat, is that if somebody was driving by, they would possibly get the impression that you weren't actually alone and somebody was coming back. So sitting in the passenger seat might be a better alternative if we're a lone worker traveling and we're in a breakdown situation. I talk about road rage incidents. The number of times as a police officer, people will come into the police station, officer, I've been smacked in the face. I was at the traffic lights when this guy got out and he came around and he tried to get the door open and then had a go at me. And I tell staff, don't get out of the car, lock the door, shut your window, sound the horn, bap, keep the hand on the horn, attract attention, get people looking in that direction. And then we look at, for staff, then going into different areas, the locations where they've identified previously, parking. If it's a cul-de-sac, spinning around. I had staff from one housing association, the tenant got quite irate, picked up a plank of wood and he chased the two trades guys out of the house. Unfortunately, their van was facing out of the cul-de-sac. So one member of staff managed to get in there, run away. The other didn't have no time and he just had to leg it out of the cul-de-sac itself. So thinking about how we park and the locations we choose to park. This is a photograph I took up in Birmingham. Yeah, for me, it certainly if it had been nighttime, I would have been a little bit more concerned. It didn't give me, but a little bit on gut reactions, those feelings of gut reactions where we may not feel that particularly safe. Things to consider there, and the inference then to have our keys in a hand and walking with our keys and being out and about. And all along, I want you to think about your staff, your employees who are making these sometimes daily decisions, where they're going, who they're visiting, where they're parking, and now out walking, for example. When they are out walking, about the types of environments when they're making their way then to see people. Shortcuts and lanes of this nature. And if I come out of this again now, hang on a sec, I've got a few more little visuals to help with. So coming out of this, and sometimes the shortcuts they might take, walking down a subway environment and what to do, and do you just ignore? Do you pretend to have your mobile phone in your hand or ignore completely? And eye contact when you're passing people, you might feel a little bit uncomfortable. And just sometimes I think our staff feel uncomfortable in certain situations. And I guess, sorry, let me just come back out of that. So it's important then that they have that awareness of what to do, what actions to take in certain situations. Let me just take that over there. Okay, right, so let's carry on. The types of items our staff carry, it might be just a handbag, the contents of the handbag. In terms of data protection, what if the handbag was stolen? What if they got notes specific or pertinent about the service user they're going to see? Is there any medical information in that handbook? So things like that are sensitive data in some cases. So how they hold a handbag on their shoulder, how do we do it safely? If it's not a handbag, if they're carrying a laptop, how they can disguise a laptop to make it less likely that they might be in some way they might attract attention. And in terms of phones, what we did see pre-COVID in certain parts of the country, we saw a big increase in phone snatches from the person's hand. And certainly in my policing role, I was very aware of that type of crime taking place. And in terms of the motivations of criminals and the types of questions they ask to get us to stop, and some of the things asking staff, tell me the 4 things that a criminal might ask you to get you to stop. The time, change, use your phone, directions, things like that to get us to stop, and recognizing this and either don't answer or keep walking. But why have they selected you in the first place? Talk about personal attack alarms, how you actually use a personal attack alarm. Not many people seem to know. Yes, you pull the device or activate it, yeah, but then what? I've heard you hold it by their ear. You throw it over there somewhere. You throw it at them. None of those. Throw it on the floor behind them. And as that's sounding, you're giving them the opportunity to stamp on it. And then when they're stamping on it, then you can run away and remove yourself from that situation. And now, to add to our lone working responsibilities and maintaining our safety regarding COVID-19 and the various locations we might have to go to, and also the use of PPE to protect us and others as we go into people's properties. And in these examples, maintaining and speaking to people on the doorstep and asking them then to remove themselves in order for us to maintain our spatial distances and the like. But importantly, knocking on the doors, using lifts and places, and how do we feel, and what is the safest, and where do you stand in the lift, and all these different types of discussion points. And some of the properties that staff may go to, if they're visiting particularly vulnerable individuals or residing in houses of multiple occupancy, and their safety in those respects. And sometimes on many courses, the risks of dog bites, the risks of somebody answering the door inappropriately dressed, and staff having the confidence to say, look, not a problem, I've got to make a phone call, I'll give you 10 minutes or so to give you a chance to get dressed, and then I'll call back. Professional boundaries, not going in, no, it's not right. So keeping our distances, making these assumptions and assessments, staying safe, keeping our distances when we go about our work. Many, many times staff tell me that they've actually been locked inside a premises. They've gone in, and it may be quite innocent in many cases, but the service user, unfortunately, has locked the door. And I say about challenging that and say, look, you might have to leave urgently. So in addressing that. And then when they go into the property itself, it's quite dark. The light bulb's gone. It's a dark environment, and that could be quite a concern for them. Sometimes they're going into a cigarette-fueled environment. And is that right regarding their welfare, their general health and well-being? So again, staff having the confidence to say, look, not a problem, I'll have to make another appointment with you, or come to the office, or look, next time, I'm really, really sorry, I struggle with my breathing a bit. Can you open all your windows, please, for half an hour or so before I first arrive, and then I can come and see you? And it's having that confidence. And then thinking back to the training you might have had on lone working, if you've ever had that experience before, is when you go into somebody's house, room, where do you actually sit? So in this situation, if the person asks you to lead and walk ahead, and you now find yourself by the television in the further seat over there, with them stood or sat in here, think about your exit strategies there regarding your ability to move in a hurry. And time again, staff tell me that they're going into homes where hoarding is possibly an issue. And this naturally being a mental health related matter in terms of the support for individuals. So I just think with these virtual backgrounds, it really sort of hopefully helps staff sort of focus on some of those issues a little bit better. They can relate to it. So the environments, the different locations, and then I talk about having a bad day or a tough day. How do we deal with our tenants, our service users, those we care for, if they're having a bad day, if they're angry, if they're frustrated and they're resentful? It may not be your fault, but it may be the organization's fault, and they feel let down. So how do you manage aggression? Something we discuss and cover on the course. Excuses to leave. What if you're there speaking to the person and suddenly this lot turn up? What you say, what you do. And I encourage staff to, for example, don't enter into a conversation. Just say, look, I'm really, really sorry, something's cropped up, I'm going to have to go. And don't speak to them. Feign sickness. Feign sickness. Go, get out of it. Get out of a situation where they feel uncomfortable. Gut reactions, remove yourself. Sometimes staff tell me that they can be vulnerable to some form of sexual assault. Person gets close to them, asks them personal questions. How do they manage that situation? What do they say? What do they do? Another risk for lone workers. Countlessly on courses, staff tell me that either a colleague or them previously, many, many years ago, or recently, a service user made an allegation that they'd stolen something, they did something. And that is very, very stressful for member staff in terms of possibly being suspended while that investigation process goes on. All these different risks. And again, I guess one of the biggest risks is of a member of staff being trapped, held against their will in a property. And sadly, that can crop up quite often, only too commonly, and how staff deal with that situation. So these are the types of things that staff tell me at the start of training. We write them all down, and then we look to resolve these and look together to come up with solutions to deal with all these in-your-face threat risk situations. People going into people's homes might well see issues regarding safeguarding, and their duty then to report safeguarding issues. Their awareness around cultural sensitivities. Do I take my shoes off or not? Do I say hello? Do I shake this lady's hand? Will she speak to me, or will she just wait for her husband or her son to come forward so I can have that conversation with her, because out of modesty and cultural issues? And when we look at project staff, those members of staff who invariably find themselves working alone, managing young people or women who are victims of domestic violence or many other types of different projects, the fact that that person then is working in an office on their own, they may be sleeping overnight on their own at that location, and sometimes dealing with emergency-related issues, problems that the young people have brought because of other people in that community. So sometimes you can have a problem outside, which is now making its way towards the project itself. Drug misuse issues, dealing with trauma, and mental health and well-being related issues, drunkenness, drug misuse, as I mentioned, and sometimes self-harm. There are some amazing staff out there who, in their best way, with all the best intentions, with the experience and the skills they got, managing all these types of really, really tough, challenging situations. In training, we discuss them, we review them, and we look then to improve on different tactics and qualities and what to say and what to do. Fight situations. How would you manage a fight situation if you're on your own? What would you say? How would you intervene? Can you intervene? Can you use force? Conflict management, the law regarding self-defense. After an incident, what happens afterwards? How do you write it down? Because as employees, I'm now moving into after those events, or after all those events, when something has happened, sadly, for various reasons, I will share with you the various reasons. Staff fail to report incidents. When we look at the definition of health and safety, the health and safety definition of workplace violence, it states any incident in which a member of staff is abused, threatened, or assaulted in circumstances relating to their work. I'll deal with circumstances relating to their work. Sometimes staff could be on the day off, walking through their town, and one of their service users comes up to them, abuses, threatens, or assaults them. They're on their day off. It's a circumstance related to their work. Do they report it? If a member of staff is at home and they get an email from somebody, have you seen this while somebody's calling you on Facebook? The person responsible for this comment or whatever is a client, is a service user. It's a work-related incident. It needs to be reported. Abused. If a member of staff is personally insulted, is sexist, racist, homophobic, it's because of the way. If it makes a member of staff feel so uncomfortable, upset, angry, that they can't deal with that person again, see him again, that's abuse. Needs to be reported, but not often reported. Reasons being, the member of staff was embarrassed. They felt they could have dealt with it a different way. In some way, they felt that they were responsible for initiating that outburst. Part of the job. I'll tell you what, if I had to write down every time I got abused, I wouldn't get the job done. There are umpteen reasons why staff don't report. They're not complying with the Health and Safety at Work Act. As organisations, we should be encouraging our staff to report so we've got a better understanding of the risks they're encountering. Abuse, staff being threatened. I know where you live. I know where your children go to school. Takes me back to my policing days. But the threat that I'm going to come down there and I'm going to smash the place up. Direct threats, indirect threats, situational, experiential threats that they might find themselves in. Being assaulted. We know whether it's a push, a poke in the shoulder, a slap across the face, or a punch. Any form of unwanted contact and the serious nature of that. A sexual assault. I've had on my courses many times I think the gentlemen are the worst for this. I've had trades members of staff tell me they've gone into a property, they were doing some painting in the tenant's property, and whilst they're on the little step ladder, a male tenant has come in there and grabbed their testicles. And the reaction in the training room is people find it funny. I said to the member of staff, did you report it? Oh no, we had a good laugh about it though. A failure to report these incidents, putting them at risk, their colleagues at further risk. This is a crime. Action should be taken regarding this type of offence. Staff, unfortunately, targeted by means of harassment. I did some training recently. There was a lady working in the library for a local authority. There was an elderly gentleman every day would go into that library and sit opposite her and would leer at her the whole time, Monday to Friday, 9 till 5. What really escalated is when this elderly gentleman, the lady lived 10 miles away from the library, he was looking through a window and following her. So harassment and how we take action, how we get the police involved. So staff realizing this is not normal behavior. We need to identify these risks and deal with them accordingly. Incident report writing. In some cases, staff they've never seen the incident report. They don't even know where it is. So it's hardly surprising that some incidents don't get reported. They didn't know where the form was. It wasn't in the culture of the organisation for staff to report them in the first place. And that needs to be addressed. Time's caught me up. In that session, we looked at some of the lone working issues of a bad or a difficult day for a health worker, social worker, housing officer, trades or utility workers, for project or refuse-related support staff, and the importance of reporting procedures. So as employees, we give this information packaged to our organizer, to our employee to assess, to introduce safe systems of work, to make you as an employee safe and your colleagues thereafter. Thank you very much. A tough day in the life of a lone worker. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed for that, Vince. That was absolutely superb, and some very, very useful information there on phone and the various apps you can use. And certainly I've learnt a lot and was fiddling with my phone while you were talking. I like the way that you stress the need for worker involvement in drawing up things like lone work processes and risk management and whatever. But you know, it wasn't just about lone working; it was all the things that knock on from lone working. So you touched on, you know, the conflict management side. How do you deal with that? You talked about the cyberbullying and the sexual harassment. So thank you very much indeed for that presentation. And I know we have got one or two questions for you. So I'll hand over to Ian to just run through those questions. Ian?
Thanks, Andy. Yeah, Vince, there was a couple of questions raised. One in particular about rural areas when phone signals are poor and lone working devices may not work that well. Do you have any other tips for maybe some options that are not kind of signal reliant on mobile phone signal?
It's a real difficulty. I know that some organisations can go to that next level and look at buying purposeful phones, and it is something they should consider. So there are dedicated phones which are in a better level up than the normal phone that we would buy. So there is those. They work on more of a specialised GPRS system. Sometimes organisations should have some idea of perhaps the reliance on the member staff then to ring at certain points where they know they've definitely got a signal. So when they know they're going into a dead phone area, they make a phone call before going into that area, and as soon as they can when they've then exited that area. So at least the organisation has got some pinpoint ability. But that's what I like about the What 3 Words app and the fact that we can register our phone, because if there was an issue now, you identify using the GPRS what square you're in, and then you could then text the police if there was a danger or a medical situation, and then potentially your employer knowing then. So there are sophisticated telephone systems and using these other apps, but apart from that, it's down to the intent of the member of staff to follow the procedures before or after entering an area where there is no signal. So it is a difficult one. It is improving. There's still an awful lot of dead areas out there, I'm afraid.
Thanks, Vince. And the next question was about, it was raised at the time that you were discussing lone working devices, actually. And the question was, do we have to inform people who are being recorded? And so I believe that's in relation to the alarm receiving centres.
No, that's a good question. Any of us, I didn't get a chance today on the presentation, but I show a video of some social workers going to visit a client. And the client is stood at the front door and he's got his phone and he's recording them. We see a social worker said, look, I don't want to be recorded. Don't record me. And then he points to the colleague and he says, look, don't record me. I don't want to be recorded. In that situation, the gentleman concerned, he uploaded it onto YouTube. There were something like 4,500 views of that video and over 1,700 comments, and they weren't very polite. There was a lot of really offensive comments. The reality is he's now extended into the realms of harassment. By his actions, he's shared private data and shared it on a public platform. The problem is, it's not generally in the interest of the public for the Crown Prosecution Service to take an incident like that forward. And it's been up there for many years. So if we look at when any of us, if we walk out in the street or wherever, any person with a camera can take our photographs. We may not like it, but people can. And in the same way, if we go into the home of a service user, they don't have to tell you if they're audio or video recording you. Nowadays, in terms of the CCTV culture, people got cameras. They got car cams. They got dash cams. They got cameras on their front doors nowadays. They got cameras in their homes. So it's all so important that staff are vigilant to the fact that they could well be audio or video recorded without their knowledge. So what I encourage staff to do is to Google search themselves. Go online. If you've got a suspicion or you feel in doubt that you may have been recorded, search yourself. And it's not only a general Google search. Suzy, you can go into Google Images. Have a look at Google Images. And you can do I always tell people, if you've got a Facebook profile, which is another subject in itself, how you drill down on your Facebook profiles and similar. But if you're using your profile image, basically do a little copy of that and keep that on your desktop. And then you go into Google Images, and then you can import that photograph of you into Google Images. And Google will assess the nature of that photograph and check anywhere else out on the internet to see if that photograph appears elsewhere. It may be that you know where it appears. You recognize those sites. Well, what if you don't? Because I've had staff on my courses saying their photograph has been stolen. Somebody else is using it on LinkedIn or on a dating website like Tinder. So there's that one. There's a Google general search, an image search, but there's also something you can do called Google video search. And I tell staff to put their first name, last name, and approximately where they live into a Google video search. And this will tell them or show them, or via going direct through YouTube, if somebody has recorded them and shared it and made that available on social media. So in essence, they can, and that's a problem. I think staff should be vigilant and smarter and better informed to be checking out and doing these checks themselves. And if they see something adverse or concerning, they should be reporting that through the incident reporting procedure then for their organisations to take any further action where necessary, or even pass it on to the police.
Thanks, Vince. And one last question. How often should organisations conduct lone working training?
On the subject of training, what I tend to find is that an organisation will only embark on a training agenda for their staff because something's happened. And they think, damn, we haven't trained our staff for 5 years. And I hope I'm not sort of hitting a nerve out there, because that can happen. It's the same, I had a call the other day, can you do professional boundaries training? And my question is, what's happened? There's always generally a knee-jerk reaction because something's happened. The organisation thinks it's a bit iffy, possibility of civil action. Let's train staff. Let's tick that box. So I would recommend all new staff should go through a training requirement on induction regarding lone working, and at least every 2 years there should be a reminder. And training, don't forget, should be based on a risk assessment. If the risk is low, then it doesn't have to be so often. If the risk is high, then it needs to be more frequent. But just a little call out there to all the people watching and viewing this presentation today. Can I make an appeal? Can I ask and encourage senior managers to attend training? Because in many cases, it's only the employees who attend the training. So suddenly then, when they attend the training and then start putting these incident reports in to say they've been abused, senior managers are saying, that's part of your job. What are you reporting that for? And if only senior managers attended training and then realized some of the risks I've shared with you in that presentation and had a better understanding, and then encourage their staff then to have this culture of reporting stuff so we all learn and we're all safer, then that would be a better thing. Long answer to a little question, but it does vary on the organisation, the amount of risk with regard to that answer.
Thanks, Vince. And sorry, a bit of clarification on one of the earlier questions. It was about when we're potentially recording service users. So, for example, if we had a camera on our name badge or something like that, do we need their permission, or what sort of process do we need to go through? Okay,
so if the camera is being used for an investigative purposes, so for example, the police or local authority may use that to gather and collect evidence. Now, they have to apply for certain very, very high-level RIPA-related legislation. So push all that aside, we're looking now at some of the more sophisticated alarm systems or devices which are now coming with a pinhole camera. Now, a member of staff having that device should not be going in and immediately activating that without the knowledge or whatever. That is only to be used if suddenly a risk presents. The person starts getting aggressive or arguing or some form of sexual advance or whatever. If there's something the member of staff feels that I now still start to feel uncomfortable, it's only then that they discreetly activate that. It means that then they were being watched and supervised externally for their own safety. It's being recorded for an evidential purposes and when necessary escalated to the police. So no, there is no requirement to say, I'm now recording this, just to let you know. They don't have to say that. It can be subtle, discreet. They may wish to in some cases. I know that staff working on trains involved in ticket collection, they will have a very visible body cam. And they will say, right, excuse me, sir or madam, for your safety and mine, I'm now recording this. So sometimes we can choose to say or not to say, but there's no legal requirement for you to tell somebody in advance, because that actually might antagonize the situation. That, by telling that person, may result in the member of staff getting assaulted. So it's down to training. Do you do it or do you not? Use it to be discreet, in some cases to protect you.
That's all the questions. Cheers, Vince. I'll pass you back to Andy.
Okay, thank you, Ian, for doing the questions for us. Vince, again, thank you very much indeed for your presentation. If you have a look in the chat room, you'll see that there's lots of comments come back thanking you and for an excellent presentation. Right, time to wrap up, I think. I believe that Black Friday is a week today. But today, I believe, has been a very bright Friday. Bright because I guess we've all learnt something about lone working, and perhaps we all think that we perhaps need to go away and do something a bit more about it. So it's been good from that point of view. And certainly on behalf of all of us, I would like to thank both Angela and Vince for their presentations today. Thank you all for attending and participating. We hope you've enjoyed it and it's been informative for you. So we'll close it there, but I'll say keep safe, keep well, and we'll hopefully see you again sometime. Thank you.